For my extractivist project, I'm going to be talking about the Panama Canal. As you can see just above my head is a picture of the front of the Panama Canal, and I took this picture when I went to Panama over my winter break. Dive into the details that you enlisted in the directions for this project. I thought it would be good to go over a few brief details about the upbringing of the canal itself. With that being said, why was the canal built? The idea of creating a water passage across the Isthmus of Panama linking the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean dates back to at least the 1500s. The realization of such a route across the mountainous, tropical terrain was deemed impossible at the time. Because of the tropical terrain, rainfall was almost every day and it was present. And because of this hard rainfall, mass landslides were one of many problems that arose. The only other route was to sail around South America via the unpredictable Straits of Mangola, or the use of the Panama Railroad to transfer goods and people from one ocean to another. So what happened next? France, led by Count Ferdinand de Lesseps, and de Lesseps was known for creating the Suez Canal in Egypt. Him, along with France, were the first country and person to attempt the task in 1880. They soon ran into many problems. One of the first problems that arose was disease. Yellow fever and malaria were two prominent diseases that were affecting not only the workers that were working on the canal, but also affecting the community around. Another problem that arose was the equipment. Because of the tropical terrain and the mountainous or tropical climate and the mountainous terrain, the equipment often broke. And because of this, France did not have the economic funds to continue to upgrade and fix these broken down machines. So these were just a few problems that came up right away, and this led to oftentimes hard-working problems that needed to be fixed. So along with these problems, de Lesseps also realized it was also going to be impossible to make a continuous path throughout the country, so he needed to utilize a lock canal. However, after he came up with this realization and presented it to the country itself, the funding for the project was quickly pulled in 1888. What happened after France's funding was pulled for the project? Well, following the deliberations of the United States Isthmian Canal Commission and a push from President at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, the United States purchased the French assets in the canal zone. With the purchase of this canal zone, the United States agreed to fix whatever equipment was present in order to save them some money ultimately. On November 6, 1903, the United States recognized the Republic of Panama, which was one of the first steps in the negotiation between the country itself and the United States. And then on November 18th of 1903, the I Buena Veriel Treaty was signed with Panama. And above me is a picture of Theodore Roosevelt when he visited Panama to check in on the expansion of the project. The picture is actually from 1906 when he made his first visit. What did this newly signed treaty entail? Well, this newly signed treaty on November 18th detailed that Panama would receive $10 million and an annuity of $250,000 beginning in the year 1912. The treaty was condemned by many Panamanians as an infringement of their country's newly national sovereignty. Now, why would the Panamanians think this? Well, after finally getting recognized from the United States, they thought it was their job and the local community's job themselves to establish an identity and to create this canal by themselves as their first big project. They wanted the entire recognition of this project, and they wanted to be awarded economically for what this idea brought. Above me is a newspaper article that said the treaty was signed for the Panama Canal, and this was what the local newspaper looked like. After the new treaty was signed and the United States finally had the French assets in their court, what were the Americans going to do? Well, the Americans devised a plan for a sea level canal along the roughly 50-mile stretch from Cologne to Panama City. With the project officially commenced with a dedication ceremony on May 4, 1904, Chief Engineer John Wallace encountered many immediate problems. One of the problems he faced was the workers. Because of the diseases of yellow fever and malaria, many workers were dying, and many local workers did not want to work for fear of their health. Other problems included mass landslides that would wipe away all progress that was made, and that was due to the heavy amount of rainfall that they encountered. Shortly after a year on the project, Wallace resigned. Above me is a picture of Chief Engineer John Wallace. After the resignation of John Wallace, in came John Stevens. And John Stevens was a railroad specialist who took over as chief engineer in July of 1905. And as he took over in 1905, he immediately addressed the workforce issues by recruiting West Indian laborers. In addition, Stevens ordered new equipment and devised efficient methods to speed up work. One of those new methods to speed up the work include a piece of technology called the swinging boom. Essentially, the swinging boom is a piece of technology that worked sort of like a crane. This swinging boom would move large pieces of railroad and would also move dirt to expedite the process. He also quickly recognized the difficulties of the landslides and convinced Roosevelt that a lock canal was best for the terrain. John Stevens had devised a method for speeding up the process and coming up with a plan to best complete the canal. It was up to Dr. William Gorgas to cover the disease side of it. So what did Dr. William Gorgas do? The project was immediately and immensely helped by Chief Sanitary Officer Dr. William Gorgas. He believed that the mosquitoes carried the deadly diseases indigenous to the area, including malaria and yellow fever. So, in order to deal with these issues, he fumigated the entire 50-mile stretch. The last report of case of the yellow fever on the Isthmus Canal came in November of 1905, while malaria cases dropped precipitously over the following decade. Stevens and Gorgas had eliminated essentially all problems that were lying in front of them. Construction on the track in 1906 slowed as Stevens suddenly resigned a few months later. Incensed, Roosevelt named Army Corps engineer Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals the newly chief engineer, granting him authority over virtually all administrative matters in the building zone. And one thing that Goethals did was improve the housing of the workers and their families. Above me is actually a photo of the houses he built to encompass and to care for the workers of the Panama Canal. Construction on the Panama Canal was underway. Goethals focused efforts on the Culebra Cut, the clearing of the mountain range between Gamboa and Pedro Miguel. What this cut is known for is being the deepest part along the Panama Canal. Despite the attention paid to this phase of the project, the Culebra Cut was a notorious danger zone as casualties mounted from unpredictable landslides and dynamite explosions. Ultimately, the three locks along the canal route lifted ships as high as 80 feet above sea level or 85 feet above sea level to man-made Gooten Lake in the middle. Hollow, buoyant lock gates were also built, varying in height from 47 to 82 feet. The entire enterprise was powered by electricity and run through a main control board. project began drawing to a close in 1913. The Panama Canal officially opened on August 15, 1914, although the planned grand ceremony was downgraded due to the outbreak of World War I. Completed at a cost of more than $350 million, it was the most expensive construction project in the United States history to that point. Now, this entirety of $350 million also included the $40 million of the purchase from the United States to France for the French assets, as well as the $10 million to Panama and the $250,000 in annuity to Panama as well. The Panama Canal. Bolstered by the addition of the Madden Dam in 1935, the Panama Canal provided a vital component to expanding global trade routes in the 20th century. The transition of local oversight began with a 1977 treaty signed by the United States President Jimmy Carter and Panama leader Omar Torrijos, with the Panama Canal Authority assuming full control on December 31st, 1999. The canal hosted its 1 millionth passing ship in September of 2010. Above me is a picture I took while I was there during winter break. Where I'm standing is actually a tourist platform where people can see the entire process of the ships going through the canal itself, or at least the first lock. What's worth noting is that there are two ships that escort the main cargo ship. Once they get within a certain mile range, these two main ships will hook up a cable line, and then they will then be hooked up to two cars that are alongside the ship, and the cars will guide them with tension on the rope or steer them in the direction that they're supposed to go. And so these cars will move simultaneously through the lock, and then once they get to the point where they can close the gate behind the ship, water is then floated up through, and that next gate is dropped down, so ships can be artificially raised and lowered in order to fit the mountainous terrain. Now, what corporations are involved? The Panama Canal has been fully owned and administered by the Republic of Panama since the transfer of management from the joint U.S. Panamanian-Panama Canal Commission in 1999. Today, the Panama Canal Authority, ACP, is charged with the administration and maintenance of the waterways, resources, and security as an independent entity of the national government. The United States continues to be the heaviest user of the Panama Canal, with 66% of the canal's cargo traffic began or ended its journey at a U.S. port, while cargo from or to China made up 13% of its traffic, according to 2019 data. Now, the logo above me is pasted everywhere you go. Once you get near the Panama Canal, it is very shown and demonstrated that the Panama Canal Authority is in charge of this area. Who was affected by the canal when it was first being built? The original inhabitants of Panama were indigenous Amerindian tribes of Choca, Cuna, and Guayamese. The Choca, along with the local Panamanian people, were the most prominent. Choca villages consist of round dwellings on piles, usually along rivers. The Choca practice shifting horticulture, the slash and burn pattern common throughout much and most of tropical America. Unlike most of their neighbors, the Choca grow only food crops. They also hunt with bow and arrows and with blowgun and poison darts. The Choca society is organized around the household, a patriarchal society where the oldest male being the head spokesman. In my research of this project, the local Panamanian people were also got mixed in with a lot of immigrants who came in to work on the canal itself. Was the community affected? Since its construction, the Panama Canal has had a crucial impact on the community. By opening a new era of maritime trade, it completely changed the local community's economy and cemented a new era in history. Its construction marked a period of migration of nationals and foreigners that laid the foundation for the growth of the provinces of Panama and Colón. In the process of being built, oftentimes local people had to be moved in order to construct the 50-mile stretch. In this case, people were outraged and there was a lot of displacement and unrest. As mentioned, there was a lot of rising tension. Over the years, the Panamanians sought to obtain more equitability provisions from the original treaty than the United States was willing to concede. The need for continued negotiations was due to the Panamanians' view as improper interpretations by the United States of the original treaty. There was misinterpretations revolved around matters such as the sovereignty issue, the impenetrability clause, the flying the Panamanian flag in the zone, the importing of third-party goods into the zone, the exclusion of Panamanian goods and services from the zone markets, and the discrimination against Panamanian workers in the zone. In addition to the treaty issues, the day-to-day zone operations involving living conditions between Panamanians and zone officials and employees also created tensions. Oftentimes, Goethals was described as a man that was treating the locals as if he was a army lieutenant, constantly yelling at them and giving harsh orders. And when it came to displacing families from their communities, he was not gentle about it and he forced locals out. The canal's civilian officials were accused of discriminating against the Panamanian labor force in the zone. In addition, the problems between the United States and the Panamanians reached fever pitch in 1959 and 1964 with overt riots and discrimination against the United States' presence on the isthmus. What happened? What resulted were 3 days of riots, destruction of $2 million worth of property, and at least 20 people killed. Panama broke off relations with the United States and accused them of aggression and appealed to the Organization of American States and the United Nations. On December 18, 1964, President Johnson issued a statement announcing that the United States would proceed with plans for a sea-level canal and would negotiate with Panama a new treaty to replace the Treaty of 1903. It was not until 1967 that three drafted treaties were unveiled in the Panamanian population. The 3 draft treaties concerned a new Panama Canal Treaty, base rights and status of forces agreement, and a treaty for the building of a new sea-level canal in Panama. It wasn't until 1977 that a treaty was agreed upon. Above me is a picture of local students that were protesting the United States' presence in Panama at the time. Be concluded. The canal made it cheaper and faster to ship goods. It also allows higher volume of goods and larger ships to travel, increasing capacity and the efficiency of trade. It has improved trade relations with Latin America and opened a new trade route and markets. It is a great site for tourism and allows local businesses to grow. When I visited there this past winter, one thing that was worth noting was how popular open markets were just outside the canal. Local businesses would set up shop to sell their own products, including hats, jewelry, and spices. So all around the canal, local businesses were growing. They were everywhere. All the tourist buses stopped there, so they were helping to try and support the local people. And with that, we also see an expansion may be coming. When we visited the area, our tour guide actually mentioned that the canal was expanding. With this expansion, they said that not only will it boost their economy because of how expensive it is for ships to go through the canal, but this economy will also be redistributed to the country itself. Because Panama City is growing and it has modernized and urbanized and it is a main tourist destination, large amounts of money are coming to this area and are actually helping local people. Panama is also being showcased for the Panama Canal being one of the 7 wonders of the world. So with that, the history of the Panama Canal is unique. As I said, the upbringing and the creation story of this canal is harsh. You look at the forced displacements, you look at all the death between the yellow fever, malaria, the landslides that killed many people, the dynamite explosions. So even though with this extractivist project, this is certainly a case in which a large amount of natural resources were removed from an area, what the Panama Canal brings today is unique and does help the local area. It is worth noting that we cannot forget everything that happened and everything that occurred through this upbringing, but it is worth noting that the Panama Canal is a 7th wonder of the world and does help bring publicity to this area every single day. A list of sources that helped make this project be what it is.